Top 7 things people do when they are secretly unhappy. It does not always look like sadness. That is the thing most people miss. Unhappiness, the quiet chronic kind, the kind that lives beneath the surface of a functional life, does not always announce itself as depression or grief or obvious distress. It can look perfectly fine from the outside. It can look like productivity or humor or a very full schedule. The signs are there, but they are subtle. And because they are subtle, they are easy to explain away in yourself and in the people around you. Just busy, just tired, just a phase. But patterns are patterns. And the ones in this video appear consistently in research on well-being, in clinical observations, and in the accounts of people who have looked back on difficult periods of their lives and recognized what they could not see at the time. These are the 7 things people do when they are secretly unhappy, and what each one is actually trying to tell you. Number 7. They stay relentlessly busy. Busyness is one of the most effective and most socially acceptable ways to avoid the contents of your own mind. When there is always something to do, something to organize, something to plan, something to respond to, the uncomfortable feelings that might otherwise surface do not get the space to surface. The schedule becomes a defense, not a conscious one. Most people who use busyness this way are not aware they are doing it. They experience themselves as productive, as responsible, as people who get things done. And they are. But the busyness is serving a second function. Research on emotional avoidance, including work by psychologist Stephen Hayes and colleagues in the field of acceptance and commitment therapy, has found that attempts to avoid or suppress internal experiences, including uncomfortable emotions, are strongly associated with poorer mental health outcomes, including increased anxiety, depression, and emotional rigidity over time. The avoidance that feels protective in the short term makes the avoided experience more powerful, not less. Secretly unhappy people are often the most productive people you know. Not because productivity is a sign of unhappiness, but because the drive to stay busy, specifically to never be still, is sometimes a sign that stillness feels dangerous. Number 6. They use humor to deflect rather than connect. Humor is one of the most valued human capacities. It builds connection, signals intelligence, eases tension, and is genuinely one of the more beautiful things people do with language. None of that is in question here. What is different is the pattern. The person who is secretly unhappy often uses humor not to connect, but to redirect. Every serious moment becomes a joke. Every expression of vulnerability, in themselves or others, is immediately lightened. The humor arrives specifically at the moments when something real is trying to surface and redirects it back below the waterline. Research on humor styles by psychologist Rod Martin has documented a distinction between affiliative humor, used to build connection, and self-defeating humor, used to mask pain, attract sympathy through jokes, or maintain distance from genuine emotional engagement. People who score high on self-defeating humor measures in Martin's research show significantly higher rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. The person who is always the funniest in the room, who can make a joke out of anything, who never lets a serious moment stay serious, may be doing something that looks like confidence but is operating as cover. The humor is real. The deflection is also real. Number 5. They overthink everything. Overthinking is almost always framed as a cognitive problem. Too much analysis. Too many considerations. A mind that will not quiet down. But research on the relationship between rumination and mood suggests that overthinking is more accurately understood as an emotional symptom. Psychologist Susan Nolan-Hoeksema, whose decades of research on rumination and depression became some of the most influential work in clinical psychology, found that the tendency to ruminate, to repeatedly think about the causes, meanings, and implications of a negative experience, is one of the strongest predictors of depression and is often both a symptom and a cause, creating a feedback loop in which unhappy people think more, and thinking more makes them less happy. People who are secretly unhappy are frequently described by themselves and others as overthinkers. Though overthinking is rarely about the surface topic it appears to be about. It is the mind's way of staying engaged with a distress it has not yet been able to resolve. The thoughts circle because the underlying feeling has nowhere else to go. Number 4. They withdraw gradually without announcing it. This is one of the harder signs to notice from the outside, precisely because it happens in degrees. Not a dramatic retreat, not a clear announcement, just a slow pulling back from the people, activities, and commitments that used to feel meaningful. The calls get less frequent. The plans get made but then quietly canceled. The things that used to bring pleasure stop being sought out. The person is still present in most of the important ways, still functioning, still showing up, but there is less of them in it. The lights are on, but dimmer than they used to be. Research on behavioral activation and depression, developed through the work of psychologists Neil Jacobson, Christopher Martel, and others, has found that withdrawal from rewarding activities and relationships is both a symptom of low mood and a driver of it. The withdrawal reduces access to the experiences that sustain positive emotion, which deepens the low mood, which makes withdrawal feel more justified, which leads to more withdrawal. The person who is gradually withdrawing is often not doing it deliberately. It is the path of least resistance when everything feels like more effort than it is worth. Number 3. They compare themselves constantly and always come up short. Some degree of social comparison is normal and even useful. It provides reference points for where you stand, what is possible, and what others have achieved. The research suggests that moderate, upward social comparison can be motivating. But the comparison pattern of secretly unhappy people has a different quality. It is relentless, it runs in one direction, and it never produces anything useful. No amount of favorable comparison provides relief. No evidence of their own progress registers as meaningful. The comparison machine runs regardless of input, always arriving at the same destination, not enough. Research by psychologist Leon Festinger, who developed social comparison theory in 1954, found that social comparison is a fundamental human tendency used to evaluate one's own abilities and opinions. Subsequent research has documented that the tendency to engage in frequent, upward social comparison is strongly associated with lower self-esteem, higher rates of depression, and lower life satisfaction. The person who is secretly unhappy is often comparing themselves to everyone, all the time, measuring their insides against other people's outsides, and finding themselves perpetually on the wrong side of the ledger. The comparison is not the cause of the unhappiness, but it is one of its clearest expressions. Number 2. They struggle to experience joy in things that used to bring it. This is one of the more clinical signs, and one of the more important ones to recognize. Anhedonia, the reduced ability to experience pleasure from activities that previously produced it, is considered a core symptom of depression and a significant indicator of compromised emotional well-being more broadly. It is different from simply being in a bad mood. It is the specific experience of reaching for something that used to deliver and finding that the delivery has stopped. The food that used to be a pleasure is now just food. The hobby that used to be an escape feels like an obligation. The company of people who used to be energizing now feels draining. The person goes through the motions, sometimes successfully maintaining the appearance of engagement, but the interior experience is absent or reduced. Research by neuroscientist Kent Berridge, whose work on the distinction between wanting and liking has become foundational in the study of motivation and reward, has found that anhedonia involves a specific disruption in the brain's liking system, the capacity to experience the positive hedonic response to a pleasurable stimulus, even when the wanting system, the drive to pursue it, remains partially intact. The person who is secretly unhappy may still seek out the things that used to bring joy, but the joy is not there when they arrive. Number 1. They say they are fine when they are not, and they have been saying it for so long they have almost stopped knowing the difference. This is the deepest one, and the one that is hardest to address from the outside, because from the outside it looks exactly like being fine. The word fine is one of the most overworked words in the language of emotional experience. It covers everything from genuinely fine to barely holding on, and it is the default response in almost every social context because it asks nothing of the listener and costs nothing in the moment to say. The research on emotional expression and suppression, including extensive work by psychologist James Pennebaker, has found that the chronic suppression of emotional experience, the habitual not saying how you actually feel, is associated with measurable increases in physiological stress, reduced immune function, and over time, a kind of emotional numbness in which the person becomes genuinely less certain of what they are feeling because the habit of not reporting it has eroded the habit of noticing it. The person who has been saying they are fine for long enough may not be consciously lying. They may have simply lost access to a more accurate answer. The suppression has done its work. The distance between the word and the reality has closed, not because the reality changed, but because the word became the reality by default. Recognizing this in yourself requires more than noticing that things feel off. It requires the willingness to stop, to be still, and to ask a more honest question than you've been asking. Not how are you managing, but how are you actually? And then waiting long enough for the real answer to arrive.